The worn cuff of her sleeve caught on the corner of the silver tray. For a fraction of a second, the tower of champagne flutes wobbled, a crystal forest trembling on the brink of disaster. Elena's heart leaped into her throat, but years of practice, of balancing the weight of other people's expectations, steadied her hand. She corrected the angle, her movements a fluid dance of practiced servitude, and continued her path through the labyrinth of tables at Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive it felt less like a place to eat and more like a museum for the obscenely wealthy. Her disguise was perfect. The black uniform, supplied by the restaurant, was cheap polyester, but she'd aged it herself. A loose thread here, a faint discoloration near the collar there, a subtle shine on the elbows from years of imagined leaning. Her shoes were the master stroke, comfortable, black, non-slip, but scuffed at the toes and worn at the heels in a way that spoke of long hours and a tight budget. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, a few stray wisps deliberately escaping to frame a face she kept carefully blank. A canvas onto which the patrons could project their assumptions of her life. They would see a woman named Anna, tired, perhaps a single mother, probably burdened by debt. They would not see Special Agent Elena Vance of the Department of Homeland Security. Her target sat at the best table in the house, the one with the panoramic view of the city's glittering skyline. Damian Sterling. He was a creature of myth in the tech world, a self-proclaimed visionary who had built a billion-dollar empire, Sterling Innovations, from the ground up. He was also, according to a mountain of preliminary evidence, a monster who had built that empire on a foundation of fraud, exploitation, and human trafficking, cleverly disguised as an international talent acquisition program. Damian was holding court, his voice a confident baritone that sliced through the restaurant's polite murmur. He was flanked by two associates, men with predatory smiles and eyes that constantly scanned the room, assessing value and threat. But Damian's eyes were fixed on the woman across from him, a model whose beauty was as loud and expensive as his wristwatch. "It's about disruption, you see," Damian was saying, gesturing with a hand that wore a ring worth more than Elena's entire, fictional life savings. "The old ways are for dinosaurs. We don't just innovate, we obliterate the competition. We find the best, we bring them in, and we own their talent. It's the new manifest destiny." Eleanor approached the table, her presence deliberately unobtrusive. "Your next bottle, Mr. Sterling," she murmured, her voice soft and deferential, the accent she'd practiced for months coloring the words. Damian didn't even look at her. He waved a dismissive hand. "Just open it." She placed the tray on a nearby stand and began the ritual of uncorking the vintage champagne. The faint pop of the cork was a punctuation mark in Damian's monologue. As she poured the bubbling liquid into his flute, her sleeve, the one with the frayed cuff, brushed against his arm. He flinched as if touched by something unclean. His head snapped around and his eyes, the color of cold steel, finally focused on her. They didn't see a person. They saw a defect. His gaze traveled from her face down to her sleeve, and a sneer curled his lip. "Good God," he said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding tables to fall silent. "What is this?" He flicked a finger towards her cuff. "Are you wearing rags to work? Is this what Aurelia has come to? Hiring the destitute?" Eleanor froze, the bottle still in her hand. Humiliation, hot and sharp, was a tool she was familiar with, a necessary component of her cover. But the sheer, unadulterated contempt in his voice was something else entirely. It was personal. I apologize, sir," she stammered, playing her part. "Don't apologize," he snapped. "Be better, or be gone. Look at this." He grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong, and held her arm up for his guests to see. The worn fabric seemed to scream its poverty under the restaurant's soft, strategic lighting. "This is the problem with this country, a complete lack of standards. People have no pride." The model giggled, a high, tinkling sound that grated on Elena's nerves. The associates smirked. Elena could feel the eyes of the entire restaurant on her. Mr. Henderson, the owner, was already moving towards them from across the room, his face a mask of anxious diplomacy. Damian released her with a shove. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and crumpled it. "Here," he said, tossing it onto the table. "Go buy yourself a new shirt. Or, I don't know, a meal. You look like you could use one." He turned back to his date, the dismissal absolute. He had erased her. She was no longer a person, just an unpleasant anecdote in his evening. Mr. Henderson arrived, murmuring frantic apologies to Damien and trying to usher Eleanor away. But Eleanor didn't move. She stood there, her heart pounding not with fear or shame, but with a cold, clarifying rage. For 6 months, she had watched Damien Sterling. She had listened to his arrogant pronouncements, documented his meetings, and traced the dirty money that flowed through his accounts. She had read the files of the brilliant engineers and programmers he'd lured to the country with promises of a new life, only to trap them in a cycle of debt and intimidation, their visas held hostage by his company. She knew he was a criminal. But in that moment, as she looked at the crumpled bill on the table, she understood that he wasn't just a criminal. He was a cancer. A man who derived pleasure from crushing the spirits of those he deemed beneath him. The investigation was proceeding by the book, slow and methodical. They were building an airtight case. But the book didn't account for the soul-crushing cruelty she had just witnessed. It didn't account for the burning need to see this man not just prosecuted, but broken. She gave Mr. Henderson a small, reassuring nod, picked up the $100 bill, and walked away from the table. But as she retreated towards the sanctuary of the kitchen, her eyes caught a glimpse of something through the vast plate-glass window. Parked directly in front of the restaurant, in a space reserved for Damien Sterling and no one else, was his pride and joy. A car that wasn't merely a vehicle, but a statement of dominance. A one-of-a-kind, bespoke Pagani Zonda, the Sterling edition, with a carbon fiber body woven with threads of actual platinum. A $10 million monument to his own ego. And in that moment, a new plan began to form in her mind. A plan that was reckless, unsanctioned, and utterly outside of protocol. A plan that went far beyond the law. Justice, she decided, sometimes needed a little help. The kitchen was an oasis of controlled chaos. The clatter of pans, the hiss of the grill, and the shouted orders in Spanish created a wall of sound that insulated Elena from the hushed judgment of the dining room. Marco, a young dishwasher with perpetually worried eyes, gave her a sympathetic look as she entered. "Senor Sterling, he is a bad man, Anna," Marco whispered, scrubbing furiously at a pot. "Don't listen to him." "I know, Marco," she said, her voice tight. She smoothed her uniform, her fingers tracing the frayed cuff that had been the source of her humiliation. It was a prop, but the insult felt real. It was an insult to everyone who wore a uniform, who worked long hours for little pay, who fought to maintain their dignity in a world that often tried to strip it from them. She found Mr. Henderson in his small, cluttered office, wringing his hands. "Anna, I am so sorry," he began, his face pale. "Mr. Sterling is difficult. But he's our most important client. I can't afford to lose his business." "It's okay, Mr. Henderson," Eleanor said, her voice still in the soft, deferential tones of Anna. "I understand. I'll make sure he doesn't complain about you again. Just try to stay away from his table for the rest of the night. I'll have Maria cover it." "Of course," she said. But she had no intention of staying away. She spent the next hour working on autopilot, her mind a whirlwind of calculations and risks. The official case against Sterling was built on a complex web of financial transactions and immigration fraud. Her handler, Agent Miller, had been adamant. They needed to proceed with caution. Sterling was well connected, with a legal team that could bury them in paperwork for a decade. They needed a smoking gun, something undeniable that would pierce his corporate armor. They were close, but not there yet. After her shift, she changed out of her uniform in the cramped staff locker room. The tired, worn clothes of Anna were replaced by the anonymous jeans and dark hoodie of Elena Vance. She slipped out the back alley, the stench of garbage and gourmet food clinging to the damp air. Instead of heading for the subway, she walked 2 blocks to a nondescript parking garage where her equally nondescript sedan was parked. Inside the car, she pulled out a burner phone. She dialed a number from memory. "Miller," a gruff voice answered on the first ring. "It's me," Eleanor said, her voice now crisp and professional, stripped of any accent. "He's escalating." "What happened?" She recounted the incident in the restaurant, omitting the depth of her own emotional reaction, focusing only on the facts. "His arrogance is making him sloppy. He's taunting people. He feels untouchable." There was a sigh on the other end of the line. I get it, Vance. He's a piece of work, but you cannot let him get to you. We stick to the plan. The wire transfers we flagged from the Cayman Islands are our best bet. The forensic accountants are working on it. It's not moving fast enough, Miller, Elena pressed. We have a dozen witnesses, engineers from India, programmers from Ukraine, all too terrified to testify. He threatened one of them, a guy named Kenji Tanaka, just last week. Said he'd have his family's visas in Japan revoked. The man is a ghost. We can't even find him now. Sterling is tying up loose ends. He's getting ready to bolt. What are you suggesting? Miller's voice was wary. Eleanor took a deep breath. I'm suggesting we need to rattle his cage. Hard. We need to knock him off balance, make him make a mistake. Rattle it how? We can't just go in and shake him down. We don't have the warrant. I'm not talking about an official move, Eleanor said carefully. A long silence followed. Miller knew her. He knew her history, her background as the daughter of immigrants who had been exploited by a predatory landlord. He knew she had a fire in her, a personal stake in this kind of justice that sometimes blurred the lines of professional conduct. Vance, whatever you're thinking, stop, Miller warned. Do not go off book. Sterling is not some street-level thug. You pull a rogue move, and his lawyers will have you disavowed and hung out to dry before your report even hits my desk. Am I clear? Crystal, Eleanor lied. Good. Go home, get some sleep. We'll get him, Vance. The right way. She ended the call and tossed the burner phone onto the passenger seat. The right way. The right way felt agonizingly slow, a path paved with bureaucratic red tape, while real people like Marco and Kenji Tanaka, were being crushed under Sterling's heel. Damian Sterling didn't play by the rules. He saw rules as suggestions, obstacles for lesser people. Maybe, just for a moment, she needed to think like him. She started her car, but she didn't drive home. Instead, she drove back towards Aurelia. She parked a block away, in the shadows, with a clear view of the restaurant's entrance. She settled in to wait. The crumpled $100 bill was still in her pocket. She took it out, smoothing it on her knee. It wasn't an insult anymore. It was fuel. The hours ticked by. Eleanor watched the parade of wealth come and go from Aurelia. Valets in crisp red jackets scurried back and forth, fetching Bentleys, Ferraris, and Rolls-Royces for patrons who barely acknowledged their existence. Elena's focus, however, remained locked on the gleaming, platinum-laced sculpture of a car parked at the curb. The Pagani Zonda. It was more than a car, it was a declaration. It screamed, I am richer, more powerful, and better than you. Around 1 a.m., the front doors of Aurelia opened and Damian Sterling emerged. He was laughing, his arm draped around the model, who looked bored and beautiful. His associates followed, their expressions sycophantic. The valet, a young man named Leo whom Eleanor knew from the restaurant, practically sprinted to the Pagani, his movements filled with a nervous energy that betrayed his fear of scratching the $10 million machine. Leo opened the passenger door for the model, then the driver's door for Sterling. Damian paused before getting in, running a hand almost lovingly along the car's sleek, curved fender. It was a gesture of ownership, of pride. He looked at the car the way a king might look at his crown. This, Eleanor knew, was his Achilles heel. It wasn't just an asset, it was the physical manifestation of his ego. To harm the car would be to harm him in a way no financial penalty ever could. She watched as the Pagani's engine roared to life, a guttural, angry sound that echoed down the quiet street. The car pulled away from the curb with an arrogant burst of speed and disappeared into the night. Eleanor started her own engine and followed, keeping a safe distance. Her plan was still a nebulous, dangerous idea, but it was solidifying with every passing moment. Miller's warning echoed in her head, but it was drowned out by the memory of Damian's sneer, the weight of his contempt. She followed him not to his penthouse apartment, but to an industrial chic nightclub in the meatpacking district. This was his second act for the night. She found a parking spot across the street, partially obscured by a dumpster, and continued her vigil. She knew she couldn't act here. There were too many people, too many cameras. She needed the right moment, the right location. An hour later, her burner phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. A single photo. It was a picture of Marco, the dishwasher, sitting on a bus bench. His face was bruised, his lips split. Below the photo was a simple message. Tell your friend to keep his mouth shut about his visa. Some employers don't like whistleblowers. Ice flooded Eleanor's veins. It had to be Sterling. He must have had someone watching the staff, listening. Marco must have said something, complained to another employee about his situation, and the wrong person overheard. Sterling wasn't just arrogant, he was actively, brutally silencing any potential threat. He had sent a message, not just to Marco, but to all the others he was exploiting. You are disposable. All thoughts of protocol, of Miller's warnings, of the right way evaporated. This was no longer about a case, it was about a rescue. It was about retribution. She texted Marco on his regular phone. Are you okay? Where are you? The reply came a few minutes later. I'm okay. Some guys just roughed me up, told me to be quiet. I'm scared, Anna. Go home, lock your door, don't talk to anyone. I will handle this, she texted back. I promise. The promise felt like a sacred vow. She looked back at the nightclub. The thumping bass of the music was a dull, rhythmic pulse, like the heartbeat of a predator. Her mind raced, sifting through the intelligence she had gathered on Sterling over the past 6 months. His habits, his routines. She knew he never stayed at clubs for long. He would soon be heading home to his sterile, minimalist penthouse. And she knew the route he would take. She pulled out of her parking spot and drove several blocks away to a quiet tree-lined street that was part of Sterling's usual path home. It was an old, wealthy neighborhood with large houses set far back from the road. There were few streetlights and even fewer cameras. It was perfect. She parked and got out, her movements calm and deliberate. From the trunk of her car, she retrieved a small toolkit. She didn't need much. Inside the kit was a Zippo lighter, her father's, a keepsake from his time as a mechanic, and a small sealed flask. It didn't contain whiskey. It contained a highly flammable accelerant, a custom blend used by arson investigators to test burn patterns. She also grabbed a simple cotton rag from a bag of cleaning supplies. She walked to a predetermined spot on the sidewalk and waited in the deep shadows of an ancient oak tree. The night was cool and quiet. The only sound was the frantic beating of her own heart. She was crossing a line, a point of no return. A career in federal law enforcement could end with this one act. But the image of Marco's bruised face flashed in her mind, followed by the memory of Damien's cruel laughter. The risk felt necessary. The law was a shield for the innocent, but sometimes, for the truly guilty, it needed to be a sword. And tonight, she would be the one to wield it. 15 minutes later, she heard it. The distinctive high-pitched scream of the Pagani's V12 engine. A pair of brilliant white headlights cut through the darkness, approaching fast. He was driving recklessly, as always. As the car drew near, Elena stepped out from the shadows. Damien Sterling was on top of the world. The deal he'd been celebrating was a masterpiece of financial engineering, a complex series of shell corporations and offshore accounts that would launder $50 million and make it vanish from the prying eyes of the IRS. The woman beside him was decorative, the champagne was exquisite, and the fear he inspired in his underlings was a potent drug. The little incident with the waitress and the dishwasher were minor amusements, reminders of his power, like a king swatting at flies. He took the turn onto the quiet residential street, enjoying the raw power of the Pagani as it devoured the pavement. The world was his personal playground. He owned it all. Suddenly, a figure stepped into the road. Damien slammed on the brakes. The Pagani's ceramic discs squealed in protest, and the car fishtailed slightly, stopping mere feet from the person standing defiantly in the glare of his headlights. It was a woman in a dark hoodie. "What the hell?" he roared, his adrenaline-fueled euphoria turning instantly to rage. He laid on the horn, a shrill, piercing blast that shattered the night's tranquility. "Get out of the road, you idiot!" The woman didn't move. She just stood there, her face obscured by the shadow of her hood. "Are you crazy?" screamed the model from the passenger seat. Damien threw the car into park. He was about to get out and teach this person a lesson when the woman moved. She walked calmly to the side of his car, to the driver's side window. He pressed the button to lower it, ready to unleash a torrent of abuse. "Do you have a death wish?" he snarled. The woman pulled back her hood. Damien Sterling stared into the face of the waitress, Anna. But it wasn't her. The meek, subservient posture was gone. The downcast eyes were gone. The woman standing before him was someone else entirely. Her eyes were chips of flint, hard and cold, and they held his gaze with an intensity that was unnerving. "You," he said, baffled. "What are you doing here? Are you stalking me? I'll have you arrested." "You like to burn things, don't you, Damien?" she said, her voice low and steady, stripped of the accent he'd heard earlier. It was a voice that held an unfamiliar authority. "Careers, lives, people's hopes. You set fire to them and watch them turn to ash for your own amusement." He laughed, a short, incredulous bark. "You're insane. I'm calling the police." He reached for his phone. In a movement so fast he barely registered it, she reached through the open window, grabbed his phone and tossed it into the back of the car. Before he could react, she splashed the contents of the small flask she was holding all over the car's carbon fiber hood. The chemical smell of the accelerant filled the air. "What are you doing?" he shrieked, his voice cracking. "That's a $12 million car. Stop." "It's just a thing, Damien," she said, her voice chillingly calm. She held up the cotton rag and the Zippo lighter. "Like my shirt, like Marco. Just a disposable thing, right?" The name Marco hit him. He realized this wasn't some random act of a disgruntled employee. This was something more. Fear, a foreign and unwelcome emotion, began to prickle at his skin. "Listen," he said, trying to regain control, to use the tone that always worked. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're making a huge mistake. I can ruin you. I can give you money. What do you want?" "Money? I'll give you whatever you want." She didn't answer. She simply flicked open the Zippo. The small flame danced in the darkness, reflected 100 times over in the car's polished surface. Panic seized him. He fumbled with the door handle, but his fingers felt thick and clumsy. The model beside him was screaming hysterically. "Don't," he begged, his voice now a pathetic whine. "Please, not the car. Anything but the car." Elena looked at him, at this titan of industry, reduced to a pleading child, begging for his favorite toy. She saw no remorse in his eyes, only the selfish terror of loss. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed the lit rag onto the hood of the Pagani. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. A plume of blue and orange flame erupted with a deafening whoosh, engulfing the front of the car. The heat was intense, forcing Elena to step back. The platinum-woven carbon fiber began to crackle and pop, melting and warping like plastic. Black, acrid smoke billowed into the night sky. Damien Sterling scrambled out of the car, stumbling and falling onto the pavement. He stared, his face a mask of horror and disbelief, as his $12 million symbol of power was consumed by a raging inferno. The flames climbed higher, licking at the windshield, which began to spiderweb with cracks before shattering. "No, no, no!" he screamed, a raw, guttural cry of pure agony. It was the sound of his ego being immolated. Sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer. The model had fled, running down the street, her terrified screams fading. Damien was on his knees, pounding his fists on the asphalt, his eyes fixed on the fire. Elena watched him, her expression unreadable. The rage that had propelled her was gone, replaced by a cold, grim satisfaction. She hadn't just destroyed a car. She had destroyed his invincibility. She had shown him that he was vulnerable, that the world he thought he owned could fight back. She let him watch it burn for a few more seconds. She let the reality of his loss sink in. Then, as the first police car rounded the corner, its blue and red lights flashing, she walked towards him. He was still kneeling, sobbing, a broken man in front of his burning God. She stood over him. He looked up, his face streaked with tears and soot. You psycho," he whimpered. "You'll go to prison for the rest of your life." Elena reached into the inner pocket of her hoodie. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a folded set of official documents and her federal agent badge. She crouched down, bringing herself to his eye level. "My name is Special Agent Elena Vance," she said, her voice as sharp and cold as breaking ice. "Department of Homeland Security." The color drained from Damien's face, the confusion, the rage, the grief. It all vanished, replaced by a new, more profound terror. "That's impossible," he whispered. "For 6 months, I've served you champagne and cleared your plates," she continued, her voice relentless. "I've listened to you brag about your crimes as if they were accomplishments. And tonight, you showed me exactly who you are. You're not a titan. You're just a bully who got rich." She unfolded the documents and held them in front of his face. The official letterhead of the United States government was unmistakable, even in the flickering firelight. "This," she said, tapping a paragraph with her finger, "is an executive order revoking your L1A intra-company transferee visa and your subsequent application for permanent residency. It's been granted on an expedited basis due to findings of significant financial fraud, conspiracy, and violations of the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Your assets are being frozen as we speak. Your company is being dismantled by a federal task force. Your associates are being arrested." She stood up, towering over him. The fire crackled, a triumphant, destructive chorus. "Your car is the least of your problems, Mr. Sterling," she said, the honorific dripping with sarcasm. "You are no longer a resident of this country. You are an illegal alien. And you are under arrest, pending immediate deportation." 3 weeks later, Elena stood at attention in the regional director's office. The air was frigid with the sterile chill of judgment, a silence that felt heavier than sound. Agent Miller was a statue by the window, his gaze fixed on the cityscape below, his jaw a knot of tension. Opposite Director Cynthia Reyes's imposing mahogany desk sat 2 men from the Office of Professional Responsibility. They were identical in their grey suits and grey expressions, their names irrelevant. They were auditors of action, accountants of consequence. The senior auditor, a man named Graves, adjusted his glasses, the movement precise and irritating. "Agent Vance," he began, his voice a dry rustle of paper. "Let's summarize. You went off book, ignored a direct order from your handler, and committed felony arson, resulting in the destruction of $12 million of property. You generated enough negative press to keep our communications department working overtime for a month. Is that an accurate assessment?" "Yes, sir," Elena said, her voice a flat line. "And you did all of this because your feelings were hurt?" Graves pressed, a hint of a sneer in his tone. "Our profilers suggest a personal over-identification with the perceived victims, likely stemming from your own documented background. A vendetta born from a public slight. Would you say your actions were emotionally compromised?" Eleanor met his gaze, her stillness a rebuke to his fidgeting. The silence in the room stretched. "Mr. Graves," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "With respect, your profilers are paid to find pathology in patriotism. They see a fire, I see a key. They see arson, I see a non-standard warrant execution under exigent circumstances, as outlined in Guideline 7B of the Field Operations Manual. I saw an asset, Marco Alvarez, physically assaulted as a direct result of the target's escalating paranoia. A clear sign of witness tampering. I saw a key witness, Kenji Tanaka, about to be disappeared. I saw a 2-year investigation circling the drain because we were fighting a monster with legal briefs while he was burning evidence and people. My actions were not emotionally compromised. They were a tactical necessity." Graves blinked, taken aback by her cold rebuttal. "A tactical necessity that constitutes multiple felonies, Agent. Felonies that yielded the single greatest intelligence seizure in this department's history," Elena countered, her eyes flicking to Director Reyes, who remained impassive, her fingers steepled. "Felonies that have already led to the indictments of 2 senators and a federal judge. Felonies that dismantled a human trafficking ring in 48 hours. If you'd like to charge me, sir, I'm sure the U.S. Attorney's Office will be fascinated to hear how my personal vendetta saved them a decade of litigation and protected dozens of victims from a predator your procedures couldn't touch." The air crackled. Miller almost smiled. Graves opened his mouth, then closed it, his face flushing. Director Reyes finally spoke, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. "Thank you, gentlemen. Your report is noted and will be given every consideration. You may go." It was a command, not a suggestion. The auditors gathered their files and left, the click of the closing door a gunshot in the quiet room. Miller turned from the window. "They want your badge, Elena. They want to make an example of you." "I know." Reyes slid a thick file across the desk. It landed with a soft, final thud. "This is the official finding. You are reprimanded for gross insubordination, a month's unpaid suspension, a permanent letter of censure in your file that will follow you for the rest of your career." She paused, her gaze pinning Eleanor to the spot. "Officially." The tension in the room shifted. "Unofficially," Reyes continued, a dangerous glint in her eyes. "That was the most audacious, unorthodox, and brilliantly effective intelligence seizure I have ever seen. You didn't just break the rules, Vance. You melted them down and forged them into a key." Miller let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. "That night," he said, walking toward her, "Henderson's signal. It wasn't just a nose touch, was it?" Eleanor shook her head. "When he apologized to Sterling, he said, 'It's a burning shame our standards have slipped.' It was the pre-arranged duress code. It meant the target had become physically violent and was actively destroying evidence. It was a green light for an extreme extraction." "And Tanaka?" Miller asked. "He was more than a ghost." "I found him in the boiler room of a church in Queens," Eleanor said, her voice softening. The memory was vivid, the smell of rust and damp concrete, the hulking shape of the furnace like a sleeping beast. Sterling had shown him photos of his daughter walking to school in Kyoto. He was broken, staring at the floor, his hands trembling so badly he couldn't hold a cup of water. She paused. "I didn't show him my badge. I sat with him on a milk crate and told him about my father. How men like Sterling don't just steal your future, they steal your past. They make you ashamed of who you are. He didn't want justice, he wanted to reclaim his pride." "So he gave you the car," Reyes murmured. "He gave me the car's soul," Elena corrected. Sterling was obsessed with security. He wanted a digital black ledger kept on a physically isolated server. So Tanaka built it for him, a solid-state drive encased in a heat-proof ceramic composite he developed, rated to 3,000 degrees. He installed it inside the engine block, camouflaged as a redundant sensor module. Fireproof, shockproof. He called it Sterling's heart. Miller's smile was slow and full of disbelief. The only way to get it was to seize the car as evidence in a major felony. "You didn't just commit arson, Eleanor. You wrote your own search warrant with gasoline." "The fire was a tool," she said simply. "It burned away the platinum and the lies and left only the truth." Reyes leaned back, a genuine smile spreading across her face. "Your suspension is effective immediately. Go to a beach. When you return, this will be waiting." She slid another file toward Eleanor. "A Russian oligarch is using Miami art galleries to move sanctioned assets. He has a particular fondness for his super yacht, the unsinkable Dassault. The first one sank. He's also notoriously condescending to the service staff. We have a theory about where he keeps his real ledgers." Eleanor's final duty was to witness the deportation. The private airfield was a desolate expanse of grey concrete under a grey sky. Damian Sterling, stripped of his bespoke suit, looked small and shrunken in his drab orange jumpsuit. The fabric hung on him, a constant abrasive reminder of his fall. As he was led toward the jet, he saw her standing with Miller, his face contorted into a mask of pure hatred. "You," he rasped, lunging against the marshal's grip. "You destroyed my life. For what? Because I hurt your pathetic little feelings." Eleanor walked toward him, stopping just out of his reach. The wind whipped her hair across her face. "You think this was about $100 bill?" she asked, her voice quiet. "This was never about me, Damien. This was about your monument." He spat on the tarmac. "You were just jealous. You see something beautiful you could never have, and your only instinct is to destroy it." "Oh, I didn't want to destroy it," she said, a chilling smile touching her lips. "I just wanted what was inside. You see, you were so proud of the platinum weave, so obsessed with the glittering surface, you never stopped to think about what the man you broke might have hidden in its heart." She saw the flicker of confusion, then the sickening wave of comprehension. His face went slack. The arrogance, the rage, it all collapsed inward, replaced by the pure horror of a man realizing he had meticulously engineered his own doom. Tanaka, he whispered, the name an agonizing curse. He sends his regards, Elena said. From her pocket she produced a small, scorched grey object, no bigger than a matchbox. It was the ceramic-encased drive. He wanted you to know that the composite protecting this was his masterpiece. He called it kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, making it more beautiful for having been broken. He said he took something you shattered, his career, and used it to build your tomb. She then glanced over her shoulder. Standing in a solemn line near Miller were not just Marco, but a dozen others. The programmers from Ukraine, the engineers from India, the designers from Brazil. Their faces were grim, their silence a powerful indictment. They all wanted to see you off. Sterling's eyes followed her gaze. He saw Marco standing tall, the fading bruise on his cheek a badge of honor. He saw the Ukrainian programmer whose passport he'd held, her expression one of cold fury. He saw the brilliant Indian engineer he'd threatened, his arms crossed, his stare unwavering. He saw the faces of every insignificant person he had ever crushed, now a silent jury at his exile. Marco took a hesitant step forward, then another, until he stood just beside Elena. He looked Sterling directly in the eye and spoke in clear Spanish. Señor Sterling, con sus $100 compré medicina para mi madre. Gracias. Sterling stared blankly. What? What did he say? Elena's voice was like ice. He said, Mr. Sterling, with your $100, I bought medicine for my mother. Thank you. Seeing them there, hearing those words, witnessing his utter humiliation, was a blow more visceral than any legal penalty. It was the final crushing proof that the world he had tried to own had risen up and cast him out. A strangled sob, a sound of absolute defeat, escaped his lips as he sagged in the marshal's grip. They shoved him forward, up the stairs and into the plane. The door sealed behind him, a final metallic thud of finality. Eleanor watched the jet ascend into the vast, indifferent sky. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the crumpled $100 bill. She smoothed it on her palm one last time. You know, Miller said, coming to stand beside her, for a while there, I really thought you were going to get fired. So did I, she admitted. She looked at the bill, at the face of a man who had built a nation, not an empire of ego. He thought this was power, the power to diminish someone, to make them feel worthless. And now? It's just paper, she said, a receipt for a debt that's been paid in full. Methodically, precisely, she ripped the bill in half, then in quarters, then into dozens of tiny pieces. The wind from the departing jet caught them, scattering the fragments of his casual cruelty across the tarmac, reducing them to nothing. Her work was done. Karma, she thought, wasn't a boomerang that might or might not come back. It was a guided missile, and she had just painted the target.